The beam of my headlights carved through the inky darkness, illuminating nothing but an endless stretch of empty road ahead. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile. The monotonous hum of tires on asphalt had become a hypnotic lullaby, threatening to lull me into a dangerous slumber. I needed to stop soon or risk becoming another statistic in a late-night highway tragedy. As if in answer to my silent prayer, a sign materialized out of the gloom. Gas, food, 24 hours, next exit. I breathed a sigh of relief and flicked on my turn signal, even though there wasn't another vehicle in sight. The exit ramp curved sharply and I had to brake hard to make the turn. As I rounded the bend, I spotted the promised gas station, a small solitary outpost of civilization in the vast emptiness of the night. The fluorescent lights of the pump area cast a harsh glow, creating a small island of visibility in the surrounding darkness. I pulled up to the nearest pump and cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat for a moment, letting my eyes adjust and taking in my surroundings. The station looked old, with faded paint and rust creeping up the sides of the pump. The small convenience store attached to it was dark, with no signs of life within. A chill ran down my spine, and I shook my head to dispel the eerie feeling. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just an old gas station." I stepped out of the car, the cool night air a welcome respite after hours in the stuffy vehicle. The door creaked as I closed it, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. I stretched, feeling my joints pop after too long in one position. As I reached for the pump, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned sharply but saw nothing but shadows. Just tired eyes playing tricks, I reassured myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I inserted my credit card and began fueling, keeping my eyes on the digital readout to distract myself from the oppressive silence and the nagging sense of unease. The numbers ticked up slowly, each click of the pump mechanism unnaturally loud in the quiet night. A sudden gust of wind made me shiver, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. As I did, I caught another flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. This time, when I turned to look, I was sure I saw a shadow dart across one of the darkened windows of the store. My heart began to race. I told myself it was nothing, a bird maybe, or just my imagination running wild in the isolated darkness. But a primal part of my brain was screaming that something wasn't right. I tried to focus on the task at hand, willing the numbers to climb faster. 70%, 80%. The night seemed to press in closer, the darkness beyond the small circle of light becoming more menacing with each passing second. At 90%, I couldn't take it anymore. I jerked the nozzle from my car, not caring that I was a few dollars short of a full tank. As I hurriedly replaced the pump, I allowed myself a glance at the store windows. My blood ran cold. There, clearly visible in the reflection of the fluorescent lights, was a face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. It was watching me intently, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of its mouth. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. But there was no one there. The store windows were dark and empty, showing nothing but my own terrified reflection. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I needed to get out of here. Now. As I yanked open my car door, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. The soft creak of a door opening behind me. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, jamming the key into the ignition with trembling fingers. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas, tires squealing as I peeled out of the station. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the pool of light by the pumps, watching my retreat. Then I was around the curve and back on the highway, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel as I pushed my speed well past the legal limit. It took nearly an hour before my heart rate began to slow and my breathing returned to normal. By then, the gas station was far behind me, nothing more than a terrifying memory. I tried to rationalize what had happened. I was tired, my mind was playing tricks on me. It was probably just an employee I had startled. But deep down, I knew. Whatever I had seen in that window wasn't human. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. I had survived the night, escaped whatever threat had been lurking in that isolated gas station. I was safe, or so I thought. It was then that I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. They had been there for a while, I realized with growing horror, keeping pace with me, always at the same distance. As I watched, they began to draw closer. My hands tightened on the wheel again as I pressed down on the accelerator. Whatever had followed me from that gas station, I wasn't about to let it catch up. The chase was on, and I had no intention of finding out what would happen if those headlights ever caught up to me. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as I spotted signs for an upcoming town. I silently prayed that whatever was pursuing me wouldn't follow me into a more populated area. As I took the exit, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. The road behind me was empty. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so sleep-deprived that I had conjured up a pursuer out of nothing but shadows and paranoia? I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, figuring I could use some coffee and a chance to collect myself. As I shut off the engine, I took a moment to close my eyes and take a deep breath. When I opened them again, I nearly screamed. There, reflected in my rearview mirror, was the face I had seen in the gas station window. It was in the back seat of my car, grinning at me with too many teeth. I blinked and it was gone. But the fear remained, along with the certainty that my ordeal was far from over. Whatever I had encountered at that lonely gas station in the middle of the night, it had followed me. And I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to let me go so easily. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. I needed help, needed to tell someone what was happening to me. But as I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. There, in tiny text at the top of my notifications, was a message from an unknown number. "Thanks for the ride. See you soon." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too many hours on the road. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever I had encountered at that gas station, whatever had been watching me from the shadows and chasing me down the highway, it wasn't going to stop. It had marked me, chosen me for some unknowable purpose. As I sat there, paralyzed by fear in the early morning light of the diner parking lot, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. The normal world I had known yesterday was gone, replaced by a reality where nightmares could follow you home and the shadows held unimaginable horrors. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind racing with possibilities each more terrifying than the last. Eventually, I managed to gather enough courage to step out of the car and make my way into the diner. The cheerful bell above the door seemed to mock my fear, its bright tone at odds with the dread that had settled in my stomach. The waitress greeted me with a smile, oblivious to the terror that had followed me here. I ordered coffee with shaking hands, my eyes constantly darting to the windows, searching for any sign of my pursuer. As I sipped the scalding liquid, I tried to plan my next move. I couldn't go home. Whatever this thing was, I couldn't risk leading it to my family. I couldn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That I was being chased by a monster I saw in a gas station window? No, I was on my own. And somehow I had to find a way to survive whatever game this entity was playing with me. As I stared into the black depths of my coffee cup, I made a silent vow. I would not be a victim. I would find a way to fight back, to understand what was happening to me and why. And no matter what it took, I would find a way to end this nightmare. But even as I made this promise to myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the shadows just beyond my sight, something was watching, waiting, and smiling with too many teeth. Story 2. The crackle of the police radio cut through the stillness of the night, jolting me from my highway-induced trance. Dispatch to Unit 17, we have a report of a stranded motorist on Highway 9, mile marker 127. Possible vehicle breakdown. Please respond. I reached for the handset, stifling a yawn. Unit 17 responding. ETA 10 minutes. It was just past 2 a.m. and the stretch of road ahead was pitch black, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional reflective marker. As I sped towards the location, my mind wandered to all the possible scenarios I might encounter. A flat tire, an overheated engine, maybe a family running out of gas on their late-night journey. Little did I know, I was about to face something far more unsettling. The glow of hazard lights in the distance snapped me back to attention. I slowed down, gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled onto the shoulder behind the vehicle. It was an older model sedan, red paint faded and chipped. I called in my arrival to dispatch and stepped out of the cruiser, flashlight in hand. "Hello? This is Officer Martinez. Is everyone all right?" My voice echoed in the empty night, met with silence. As I approached the car, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, but there was no sign of anyone around. I swept my flashlight across the interior, empty. "Hello?" I called out again, louder this time. Nothing but the whisper of wind through the trees lining the highway answered me. I circled the vehicle looking for any clues. The hood was cool to the touch. The engine hadn't been running recently. No luggage or personal items were visible inside. It was as if the car had simply materialized here, abandoned. That's when I noticed it. A faint path of trampled vegetation leading from the passenger side into the dense woods. My pulse quickened as I played the beam of my flashlight along the disturbed plants. Something, or someone, had definitely gone this way, and recently. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 17, vehicle located but unoccupied. Signs of possible entry into wooded area off-highway. Requesting backup to secure scene and begin search." "Copy that, Unit 17. Backup is en route. ETA 20 minutes. Are you planning to investigate further?" I hesitated, eyeing the dark tree line. Protocol suggested waiting for backup, but if someone was in trouble out there, minutes could make all the difference. "Affirmative, dispatch. I'm going to do a preliminary search of the immediate area. I'll maintain radio contact." "Understood, Unit 17. Be careful out there." I grabbed my gear flashlight, first aid kit, and an emergency blanket, and approached the makeshift trail. The foliage was thick, branches snagging at my uniform as I pushed through. The beam of my flashlight carved a narrow path through the darkness, shadows dancing at the edges of my vision. "Hello? This is the police. Is anyone out here?" My voice sounded small and muffled among the trees. I continued on, the sounds of the highway fading behind me. The forest was eerily quiet, no chirping insects, no rustling of small animals. Just the crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots and my own increasingly rapid breathing. After about 5 minutes of walking, I came to a small clearing. My flashlight beam caught something reflective on the ground. I approached cautiously, heart pounding. It was a cell phone, screen cracked but still faintly glowing with unread notifications. I crouched down to examine it, and that's when I saw the drag marks, long parallel lines in the soft earth, as if something heavy had been pulled across the clearing. They led to the opposite side, disappearing back into the underbrush. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. This was no longer a simple case of a stranded motorist. Something was very, very wrong here. I stood up slowly, every sense on high alert. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, and I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of breathing that wasn't my own. I swept my flashlight in a wide arc, searching for any sign of movement. "This is Officer Martinez," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "If anyone can hear me, please make a sound or signal. I'm here to help." Silence. Then a twig snapped somewhere to my left. I whirled towards the sound, heart hammering in my chest. "Show yourself. Police." For a moment, nothing moved. Then I caught a glimpse of something pale moving between the trees, a flash of skin, perhaps, before it vanished into the darkness. "Stop! Police!" I shouted, breaking into a run. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear movement ahead of me, just out of sight. Whatever it was fast. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. I tumbled forward, rolling down a steep embankment. My flashlight flew from my hand, its beam spinning crazily before going out as it smashed against a rock. I came to a stop at the bottom, the breath knocked out of me, disoriented in the pitch blackness. As I lay there gasping for air, I became aware of a sound water flowing nearby. I must have stumbled upon a creek bed. I fumbled for my radio, relief washing over me as I felt it still clipped to my belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17, I panted. "I've lost visual on the subject. I'm approximately—" I trailed off, realizing I had no idea how far I'd come from the road. "I'm in a creek bed somewhere in the woods. Send search team to my last known location." Static answered me. I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice. "Dispatch, do you copy? This is Unit 17 requesting immediate assistance." Nothing but more static. Either I was out of range or something was interfering with the signal. I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the various aches and scrapes from my fall. My eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness, faint moonlight filtering through the canopy above. The creek gurgled softly to my right. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound that was definitely not water or wind. It came from somewhere upstream, a noise that raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was almost like speech, but no language I'd ever heard before. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to my cruiser and wait for backup. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone's life might depend on what I did next. Taking a deep breath, I began to move cautiously upstream towards the source of that unsettling sound. The creek bed was treacherous, slick rocks threatening to send me sprawling with every step. The strange vocalizations continued, sometimes quieter, sometimes rising to a fever pitch that echoed off the canyon walls. It sounded like more than one voice now, a conversation or an argument in that same incomprehensible tongue. I rounded a bend in the creek and froze. There, in a small clearing on the bank, was a scene that defied explanation. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, refusing to accept the impossible reality before me. 3 figures stood in a rough circle, their bodies elongated and wrong in a way I couldn't quite define. They were pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Where their faces should have been, there were only smooth, featureless expanses of skin. Between them, lying motionless on the ground, was a human form. One of the creatures turned towards me, and though it had no eyes, I felt the weight of its attention like a physical force. The guttural sound stopped abruptly. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, moving with a speed and grace that belied their awkward appearance, the 3 figures melted into the shadows of the forest. One moment they were there, the next gone, leaving no trace of their passing. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind reeling. What I'd just witnessed couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the light and my own exhausted imagination. But as my gaze fell on the still form on the ground, I knew I couldn't dismiss it so easily. On shaky legs, I approached the clearing. As I drew closer, I saw it was a man, middle-aged, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was alive but unconscious. I knelt beside him, checking for injuries. There were no obvious wounds, but his skin was cold and clammy to the touch. I wrapped him in the emergency blanket from my kit, my training kicking in despite the surreal situation. "Sir, can you hear me?" I gently shook his shoulder. "I'm Officer Martinez. You're safe now." His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He looked at me with unfocused eyes, confusion etched on his face. "Where? Where am I? What happened?" "You're in the woods off Highway 9, I explained, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Your car was found abandoned. Do you remember how you got here?" He shook his head, wincing. "I was driving. Something ran out in front of my car. I swerved, then nothing. Just darkness and strange dreams." He shuddered. There were things, voices I couldn't understand. I helped him sit up slowly. "It's all right, you're safe now. We need to get you out of here and checked out by medical professionals." As if on cue, I heard distant shouts and saw flashlight beams moving through the trees. The backup I'd requested had finally arrived. Relief flooded through me, tempered by the knowledge that I'd have to explain what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, out here in the woods. As we waited for the search team to reach us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing into the shadows, half expecting to see those pale, eyeless faces emerging from the darkness. The man must have sensed my unease. "Officer," he said quietly, "what happened out here? What did you see?" I looked at him, then back at the tree line. How could I possibly explain what I'd witnessed? Who would believe me? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but whatever it was, I don't think it was meant for human eyes." He nodded slowly, a haunted look in his eyes that told me he understood all too well. As the first rescuers broke through into the clearing, I made a silent vow. I would find answers, uncover the truth behind what happened here tonight, because deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever those things were, wherever they came from, I had a sinking feeling we hadn't seen the last of them. And next time, we might not be so lucky. Story 3. The neon-lit screen of my phone flashed with an incoming message, its harsh glow cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Another urgent delivery request. I sighed, fingers hovering over the accept button. The address seemed off, but the promised payout was too good to pass up. Little did I know that decision would plunge me into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. I'm Leo, just another cog in the ever-spinning wheel of the gig economy. Motorcycle courier by night, perpetually exhausted student by day. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most of them, anyway. The cool night air whipped against my face as I weaved through the nearly empty streets of the city. Even at 4 a.m., there was a palpable energy to the place, as if it was merely holding its breath, waiting for the day to truly begin. I glanced down at my phone, mounted on the handlebars. The GPS was guiding me towards the outskirts of town, an area I wasn't particularly familiar with. The streets became narrower, the buildings older and more dilapidated. A sense of unease began to creep over me. "Turn right in 100 meters, the robotic voice instructed. I complied, finding myself on a street that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Potholes pockmarked the asphalt, and half the streetlights were out. "You have arrived at your destination," my phone chirped cheerfully. I killed the engine and looked around, confusion settling in. There was nothing here but abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots. No houses, no apartments, not even a homeless encampment. Just nothing. I double-checked the address. This was definitely the place, according to my app. But it didn't make any sense. Who would order a delivery to the middle of nowhere? A flicker of movement caught my eye. In the side mirror of my bike, I saw headlights turning onto the street behind me. The vehicle slowed as it approached, and a chill ran down my spine. I pretended not to notice, busying myself with my phone as if I was just checking the address again. The car crawled past, moving at a snail's pace. It was an older model sedan, nondescript in every way except for how clean it was, almost unnaturally so for this part of town. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver. A man, middle-aged maybe, with a face so bland it was almost impossible to describe. Our eyes met for a split second, and I felt a jolt of something. Fear? Recognition? I couldn't quite place it. The car continued on, turning at the next corner and disappearing from view. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Get it together, Leo," I muttered to myself. "You're jumping at shadows." I decided to circle the block, hoping to find some sign of life or an explanation for this odd delivery request. As I rounded the first corner, I saw the car again. It was parked at the far end of the street, engine off, just waiting. My heart began to race. This wasn't a coincidence. I gunned the engine, speeding past the vehicle. In my mirror, I saw it pull out, following at a distance. For the next 20 minutes, I zigzagged through the abandoned industrial area, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to lose my tail. But every time I thought I'd shaken them, the car would appear again, always keeping that same maddeningly consistent distance. I needed to get back to the main roads, to find people, safety. But in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. Every street looked the same, abandoned, decaying, hostile. My fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low, a fact that added a new layer of urgency to my situation. As I turned onto yet another empty street, my headlight illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. I swerved hard, nearly losing control of the bike. As I struggled to right myself, I caught a glimpse of the person. It was the driver, the same bland, unremarkable face that had been haunting me for the past half hour. But that was impossible. How could he be here on foot when his car had been right behind me moments ago? I didn't stop to figure it out. I opened the throttle wide, the engine screaming as I pushed the bike to its limits. Wind rushed past me, tears streaming from my eyes as I raced through the night, no longer caring about direction, only focused on escape. The buildings began to thin out, giving way to open land. In the distance, I could see the glow of the city proper. Safety. Civilization. Just a little further. My relief was short-lived. The bike's engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I coasted to a stop, the sudden silence deafening, out of gas. Panic clawed at my throat as I looked around wildly. The car was nowhere in sight, but that brought little comfort. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with a dead phone. When had that happened? And no idea which direction would lead me back to the city. A sound behind me made me whirl around. There, at the edge of my bike's meager taillight glow, stood the man. His face was still a blank mask, but now I could see his eyes, dark, empty, and fixed directly on me. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" He took a step forward, then another. His movements were smooth, almost gliding. As he drew closer, I noticed something off about his proportions. His arms seemed too long, his neck too flexible as his head swiveled to keep those dead eyes locked on mine. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. "Stay back," I warned, though I had nothing to back up my threat. The man, if he could be called that, stopped. His mouth opened, but what came out wasn't a voice. It was a sound like static, like a radio caught between stations, punctuated by clicks and pops that made my skin crawl. "What are you?" I whispered, horror and fascination warring within me. The static voice grew louder, and I clapped my hands over my ears. Through the noise, I began to make out words, disjointed and garbled, but undeniably there. "Not human, need, vessel." My blood ran cold. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to get away. Now. I turned and ran, abandoning my bike, my helmet, everything. My lungs burned as I sprinted across the empty field, the dew-damp grass soaking through my shoes. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. The static followed me, growing louder, filling my head until I could barely think. My foot caught on something, a root, a hole. I don't know. And I went down hard, the breath knocked out of me. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air, and found myself staring up at the thing that had once looked like a man. Its form was shifting now, stretching and twisting in ways that defied physics and sanity alike. As its hand, now more like a writhing mass of tendrils, reached for me, a blinding light suddenly bathed the scene. The creature recoiled, its form seeming to smoke and dissolve where the light touched it. A voice, blessedly human, shouted from somewhere behind the light, "Step away from him, now!" The creature let out a sound like feedback from a speaker, high-pitched and painful. It retreated, its form blurring and shifting until it was nothing more than a vaguely humanoid shadow. Then in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I lay there, shaking as footsteps approached. A face appeared above me, an older woman, her expression a mix of concern and grim determination. She held out a hand to help me up. "Are you all right?" she asked, her eyes scanning the darkness around us. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. "Good," she said. "We need to move. It'll be back, and it won't be alone." What was that thing?" I managed to croak out. She gave me a long look as if debating how much to tell me. Finally, she sighed. "Something that doesn't belong in our world, and unfortunately you've just become part of a war you didn't know was being fought." As she led me to a waiting vehicle, I looked back at where my bike lay abandoned. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that my old life was over. Whatever came next, whatever this war was, I was now irrevocably part of it. The woman must have sensed my thoughts. "I know you have questions," she said as we climbed into the car, "and I promise you'll get answers. But right now, we need to get somewhere safe." As we drove away, leaving behind the scene of my terrifying encounter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The city lights grew closer, a facade of normalcy that I knew would never look quite the same to me again. I had glimpsed something beyond the veil of everyday reality, and now that veil could never be unlifted. Whatever came next, whoever or whatever was after me, I knew one thing for certain. My days as a simple motorcycle courier were over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with shadows, mysteries, and dangers I couldn't yet imagine. As we merged onto the highway, heading towards an unknown destination and an uncertain future, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Whatever was coming, I would face it. I had to. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. The night's events replayed in my mind, each detail etched with terrifying clarity. One thought kept repeating, a mantra of disbelief and dawning understanding. This is real. This is happening. And nothing will ever be the same again. Story 4. The stench hit me first, a rancid odor that cut through the usual miasma of rot and decay I'd grown accustomed to on this job. Something was different about this bin, and as I approached, a sense of foreboding settled in my gut. Little did I know, lifting that lid would change my life forever, thrusting me into a nightmare I never signed up for when I took this gig as a garbage truck worker. My name's Mike, and until that moment I was just another guy trying to make ends meet in a world that seemed increasingly stacked against the little guy. The pre-dawn hours were my domain, the streets empty save for the occasional insomniac or early bird. It was a solitary job, but I liked it that way. No office politics, no customer service smile, just me, the truck, and the endless parade of other people's discarded lives. This particular morning started like any other. The city was still sleeping as I maneuvered the hulking garbage truck down the narrow streets of the old industrial district. Most of the businesses here were long shuttered, victims of economic downturns and changing times, but a few stubborn holdouts remained, clinging to life in the shadows of abandoned warehouses and graffitied walls. I was on autopilot, my mind wandering as I went through the motions I'd performed countless times before. Grab the bin, hook it to the lift, dump, return, repeat ad nauseum. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and left me with enough energy to pursue my real passion, writing, in my off hours. As I approached the next stop on my route, something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a primal warning system kicking into gear. The business, some nondescript office with blacked-out windows, had always given me the creeps, but today the air around it felt charged, as if a storm was brewing despite the clear sky above. I shook off the feeling, chiding myself for letting my writer's imagination run wild. "Get it together, Mike," I muttered, reaching for the bin. "It's just another trash run." The moment my hand touched the lid, I knew I was wrong. The metal was warm to the touch, despite the cool morning air. And there was that smell, chemical acrid, with an underlying sweetness that turned my stomach. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to skip this stop and continue on my route. But curiosity, that damned writer's curiosity that was always getting me into trouble, won out. I lifted the lid. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. Nestled among the usual office detritus, crumpled papers, empty coffee cups, the odd banana peel, was a collection of items that had no business being there. Bloody latex gloves, shredded documents with official-looking letterheads, and most disturbing of all, a stack of photographs that made my gorge rise. I won't describe what was in those photos. Some things are better left unsaid. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I was looking at evidence of something terrible, something criminal. My mind raced. What should I do? Call the cops? Pretend I never saw anything? As I stood there, frozen in indecision, a noise from inside the building snapped me back to reality. The click of a door opening. Footsteps. Panic surged through me. I slammed the lid shut and lunged for the truck's cab, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I cranked the engine, the familiar rumble a comfort in the suddenly hostile pre-dawn quiet. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse in my side mirror of a figure emerging from the building, a man in a suit, his face obscured by shadows, watching my retreat with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I drove on autopilot, my mind whirling. What had I just stumbled upon? Who was that man? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? The rest of my route passed in a blur. I went through the motions, but my thoughts kept circling back to that bin, those photos, that watching figure. By the time I pulled into the depot at the end of my shift, I had come to a decision. I couldn't just let this go. I had to do something. But what? I sat in my truck long after the other drivers had clocked out and headed home. The weight of what I'd seen pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I was just a garbage man, for Christ's sake. I wasn't equipped to handle whatever this was. A tap on my window made me jump. It was Sal, my supervisor, his weathered face creased with concern. "You all right, Mike? You've been sitting here for an hour." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just lost in thought. Sorry, I'll head out." Sal's eyes narrowed. He'd known me long enough to know when something was off. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment I was tempted to spill everything. Sal was a good guy. Maybe he'd know what to do. But the words stuck in my throat. The less he knew, the safer he'd be. Whatever I'd stumbled into, I couldn't drag anyone else into it. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired. I'll see you tomorrow, yeah?" Sal didn't look convinced, but he nodded and stepped back. "All right, get some rest, kid." As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. Should I go to the police? But what if they were involved? The letterheads I'd glimpsed had looked official. What if this went higher than I could imagine? I could write an anonymous tip, but would that be enough? And what if they traced it back to me somehow? By the time I reached my small apartment, I was a bundle of nerves. I double-checked the locks, then sat at my worn desk, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys, itching to write, to make sense of what I'd seen through the only means I knew how. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more information. I spent the next few hours scouring the internet, searching for any news about missing persons, unsolved crimes, anything that might connect to what I'd seen. I found nothing concrete, but the deeper I dug, the more I became convinced that something big was going on. There were whispers, rumors of a shadowy organization operating in the city's underbelly. Nothing I could prove, but enough to make my blood run cold. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my cluttered living room, I came to a decision. I couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. I needed proof, something concrete that couldn't be swept under the rug. I would go back. Tomorrow night, after my shift, I would find a way into that building and get the evidence I needed. It was insane. I was a garbage man, not a detective or a spy. I had no training, no backup, no real plan. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant to find that bin, that for whatever reason this task had fallen to me. As I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion overtaking my racing thoughts, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, a wannabe writer who'd always dreamed of adventure, about to embark on the most dangerous story of my life. And I couldn't tell a soul. Sleep was elusive, filled with fragmented nightmares of shadowy figures and overflowing bins. When my alarm blared at 3 a.m., I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. I went through my morning routine on autopilot, my mind focused on the night ahead. As I climbed into my truck, I patted the pocket where I'd stashed a small notebook and pen. Whatever I found tonight, I'd document everything. If something happened to me, well, at least there'd be a record. The route seemed to fly by, each stop bringing me closer to that fateful bin. When I finally turned onto the street, my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. But the street was empty, the building dark and silent. I approached the bin, every sense on high alert. The smell was gone, replaced by the usual garbage stench. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Nothing. It was empty, freshly lined with a new bag. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Relief warred with disappointment and a growing sense of unease. They knew. Somehow they knew I'd seen something I shouldn't have. As I turned back to my truck, movement caught my eye. A curtain twitching in a second-story window. The barest glimpse of a face quickly withdrawn. I was being watched. I completed my route in a daze, my mind racing. What now? Had I imagined the whole thing? No, the memory of those photos was too vivid, too horrifying to be a product of my imagination. As I pulled into the depot, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't back down now. Whatever was going on in that building, whoever was behind it, I had to find out. For the sake of those in the photos, for my own peace of mind, I had to see this through. Tonight I'd return. Not as Mike the garbage man, but as something else, an investigator, a seeker of truth. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally have a story worth telling, if I survived to tell it. Story 5. The first flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, transforming the gentle patter of rain into a sudden violent downpour. I squinted through the windshield, my wipers working overtime against the deluge. That's when I saw it, a sign for a rest stop, barely visible through the sheets of rain. Little did I know pulling over would be a decision I'd come to regret for the rest of my life. My name's Sarah, and until that moment, I was just another weary traveler on a long, lonely stretch of highway. I'd been driving for hours, pushing through the night to make it to my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner the next day. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning what should have been an easy drive into a white-knuckle ordeal. As I guided my car into the rest stop, relief washed over me. The parking lot was empty save for a single semi-truck, its driver probably catching some sleep in the cab. I pulled into a spot near the bathroom building, leaving my headlights on to cut through the darkness. For a moment I just sat there, listening to the rain hammering against the roof of my car. The tension in my shoulders began to ease as I realized I could wait out the worst of the storm here. I reached for my phone, intending to let my sister know I might be a bit delayed. No signal. Of course. I sighed, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. It was then that I noticed something odd. Despite the torrential rain, there was a figure standing motionless in the grassy area beyond the parking lot. My heart skipped a beat as a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, tall, unnaturally still, facing directly towards my car. Even through the rain-streaked windshield, I could feel the weight of his gaze. A chill ran down my spine. Who would be out in this weather, and why was he just standing there? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a maintenance worker checking for flooding or something, but even as I thought it, I knew it didn't make sense. No one would be out in this storm unless they had to be. Another flash of lightning, and I gasped. The figure was closer now at the edge of the parking lot. I hadn't seen it move, but there was no mistaking it. The distance between us had definitely shrunk. My heart began to race. I reached for my keys, still in the ignition, ready to start the car and get the hell out of there, storm be damned. But something stopped me. A mix of curiosity and fear kept me rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the mysterious figure. The rain seemed to intensify, beating a frantic rhythm on the roof. I could barely see beyond the hood of my car now. I leaned forward, straining my eyes, trying to catch another glimpse of the stranger. Lightning flashed again and I screamed. The figure was right there, mere feet from my car. In that split second of illumination, I saw details that turned my blood to ice. The man, if it could be called a man, was unnaturally pale, his skin almost translucent. His eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. And his mouth, God, his mouth was stretched into an impossibly wide grin, filled with teeth that were just a little too sharp. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing on the wet pavement as I backed away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure still standing there, unmoving despite my sudden departure. As I shifted into drive and sped towards the exit, I could have sworn I saw it raise a hand as if waving goodbye. I drove like a woman possessed, pushing my car to its limits despite the treacherous conditions. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It couldn't have been real. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, my imagination running wild in the storm, but deep down I knew. Whatever I had seen back there, it wasn't human, and somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me. The next hour passed in a blur of rain-slick roads and frayed nerves. I kept expecting to see that pale figure in my rearview mirror, grinning its impossible grin, but there was nothing but darkness and the occasional pair of headlights from a passing car. As the storm began to subside, I spotted signs for a small town ahead. The rational part of my brain urged me to keep driving, to put as much distance between me and that rest stop as possible. But exhaustion was setting in, my eyes heavy from the strain of navigating through the rain. I pulled into the parking lot of a small motel, its neon vacancy sign a beacon of normalcy after the surreal horror I'd experienced. As I stepped out of the car, the cool night air helped clear my head. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe. A movement caught my eye. There at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the glow of a flickering streetlight, was a figure. Tall, still, watching. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. I'd driven for an hour, there was no way. I blinked and it was gone. Just an empty patch of shadows where it had stood. My hand shook as I checked in, the bored night clerk oblivious to my distress. As soon as I was in my room, I double-checked the locks, then sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. What had I seen back at that rest stop? And more importantly, why did I have the sinking feeling that it had followed me here? Sleep was elusive, filled with fragmented nightmares of pale skin and too wide grins. When I finally drifted off, it was to the sound of rain pattering against the window, a gentle echo of the storm that had started this whole ordeal. I awoke with a start, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtains, and for a moment I could almost believe that the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. But as I sat up, my gaze fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, on the small desk by the window, was a piece of paper that hadn't been there when I'd checked in. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a crude drawing, done in what looked like charcoal, a stick figure standing in the rain, and beside it in childish scrawling letters, "See you soon." I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I threw my things into my bag, nearly forgetting to check out in my haste to leave. The morning was bright and clear. The storm nothing but a memory, except for the evidence in my shaking hands. As I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed with a series of delayed messages. My sister wondering where I was. The rehearsal dinner was in a few hours, and I was still hours away. I thought about turning around, heading home, locking myself away until I could make sense of what was happening. But the thought of disappointing my sister, of trying to explain why I couldn't be there, no, I couldn't do it. Whatever was going on, whatever had followed me from that rest stop, I couldn't let it derail my life. So I drove on, the bright morning sun slowly burning away the lingering chill of the night's events. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somewhere out there in the shadows between streetlights or in the darkness of lonely rest stops, something was waiting, watching, grinning that impossible grin. As the miles rolled by, I found myself checking my rearview mirror more often than necessary, half expecting to see a pale figure materializing on the road behind me. But there was nothing but the normal flow of traffic, people going about their daily lives, oblivious to the horror that lurked at the edges of reality. I made it to my sister's house just in time for the rehearsal dinner, plastering on a smile and blaming my frazzled appearance on the long drive and the storm. As I hugged her, I felt a momentary sense of safety. Surely whatever I'd encountered couldn't reach me here, surrounded by family and the warm glow of celebration. But later that night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And just before I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of rain pattering against the window, despite the clear, starry sky outside. Whatever I'd seen at that rest stop, whatever had followed me here, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that it wasn't finished with me. This was just the beginning of something larger, something darker than I could have ever imagined. As I finally succumbed to exhaustion, one thought echoed through my mind. In the flash of lightning, in the spaces between raindrops, in the shadows of lonely highways, something waits, and sooner or later I'll have to face it again. But for now, sleep beckoned, and in my dreams a pale figure smiled its too wide smile, whispering promises of things to come. Story 6. The old farmhouse loomed before me, its weathered boards and sagging roof a stark contrast to the pristine countryside surrounding it. As I killed the engine of my motorcycle, the silence that fell was almost oppressive. The package in my courier bag suddenly felt heavier, as if warning me that this delivery was anything but ordinary. If only I'd listened to that feeling, maybe I could have avoided the nightmare that was about to unfold. My name's Alex, and until that moment I was just another motorcycle courier trying to make ends meet in a world that seemed increasingly indifferent to the struggles of people like me. The gig economy was a merciless master, and I'd learned to take whatever jobs came my way without asking too many questions. But this delivery, this one, was different from the start. The request had come in late last night. An urgent package to be delivered to this remote farmhouse with a payout that was too good to pass up. I should have known then that something was off. In my line of work, if a job seems too good to be true, it usually is. As I approached the house, gravel crunching under my boots, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The windows were dark, curtains drawn, but I could have sworn I saw one twitch as I neared the porch. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Just drop off the package and go," I muttered. Easy money. The porch steps creaked ominously as I climbed them, each sound echoing in the eerie stillness. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could make contact, the door swung open with a low groan. The interior was dark, musty air wafting out to greet me. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. "Delivery for Mr. Smith?" No response. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get back on my bike and never look back. But I'd come this far, and the thought of that paycheck kept me rooted to the spot. I took a tentative step inside, fishing out my phone to use as a flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a hallway cluttered with old furniture and what looked like piles of newspapers. The air was thick with dust and something else, a metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. "Hello?" I tried again, louder this time. "Anyone home?" A thud from upstairs made me jump, my heart racing. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming towards the staircase at the end of the hall. I swallowed hard. "Mr. Smith, I have a package for you. I can just leave it here if—" The words died in my throat as a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. In the dim light, I could make out the silhouette of a man, unnaturally still. "Mr. Smith." My voice was barely a whisper now. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to descend the stairs, each step slow and measured. As it neared, my phone's light revealed details that sent a chill down my spine. The man's clothes were disheveled, stained with something dark. His face was pale, almost waxy, with eyes that seemed to reflect the light like a cat's. I took an involuntary step back, my fight-or-flight response screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the man spoke. "You're late." His voice was raspy, as if unused for a long time. I blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry, the delivery was scheduled for—" "Not the package," he interrupted, taking another step towards me. You're late to the party." My confusion must have shown on my face because he let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but came out more like a wheeze. "Oh, you don't know, do you?" He grinned, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "You're not the first courier to come here, but you might be the last." The implication of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to run, but he was faster than I expected. His hand clamped down on my arm with inhuman strength, yanking me back into the house. What happened next is a blur of terror and adrenaline. I fought, kicking and screaming as he dragged me deeper into the house. Rooms flashed by, a kitchen with rusted appliances, a living room with furniture covered in sheets. All the while the thing that looked like a man, kept talking. "We've been waiting for someone like you," it said, its voice taking on an almost gleeful tone. "Someone strong, someone who can help us with our little project." I managed to break free for a moment, stumbling into what looked like a study. Books lined the walls, their spines covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a large table, and on it, I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The table was covered in papers, diagrams, and what looked like ancient artifacts. But what caught my eye was a map of the local area, with red pins stuck into various locations. Next to each pin was a name and a date. With growing horror, I realized the most recent pin had my name next to it. Today's date. "What is this?" I whispered, backing away. "Who are you? What do you want?" The creature, for I was certain now that it wasn't human, stepped into the room, blocking the exit. Its grin widened, stretching its face in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "We are the Watchers," it said. "And you, my dear Alex, are going to help us open the door." Before I could react, it lunged at me with impossible speed. I felt a sharp pain in my neck and then darkness. I awoke to the sound of chanting. My head throbbed, and when I tried to move, I realized I was bound to some kind of stone altar. The room around me was dimly lit by candles, their flickering light revealing hooded figures standing in a circle. Panic surged through me. I struggled against my bonds, but they held fast. "Help!" I screamed. "Somebody help me!" The chanting stopped abruptly. One of the hooded figures approached, lowering its hood to reveal the face of the thing that had grabbed me. But now, in this light, I could see that its skin was almost translucent, with dark veins pulsing beneath. "Ah, our guest of honor is awake," it said, that too-wide grin spreading across its face. "Just in time for the main event." "What are you going to do to me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The creature leaned in close, its breath cold against my ear. "We're going to set you free," it whispered. "Free from the limitations of your human form, free to join us in our great work." It straightened up, addressing the other hooded figures. "Brothers and sisters, the time has come. With this sacrifice, we will finally open the gateway and bring forth our masters." The chanting resumed, louder now, in a language I didn't recognize. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressure building as if a storm was brewing indoors. I could feel something changing, reality itself seeming to warp around us. In that moment, faced with the impossible, I did the only thing I could think of. I prayed. Not to any god I knew, but to whatever forces of good might exist in a universe that suddenly seemed much larger and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. And then, just as I felt something begin to tear in the fabric of reality itself, a new sound cut through the chanting. Sirens. The hooded figures froze, their chanting faltering. The creature that had captured me whirled towards the door, its face contorted in rage. "No!" it screamed. We were so close. Chaos erupted. The hooded figures scattered, some disappearing into hidden passages I hadn't noticed before, others simply fading away as if they were never really there. The sounds of shouting and footsteps grew closer. I renewed my struggles against my bonds, hope surging through me. "In here!" I yelled. "Help me!" The door burst open and a flood of light poured in. Police officers swarmed the room, guns drawn. Behind them I saw a familiar face, the motel clerk from where I'd stayed last night. He must have gotten suspicious when I didn't check out and called the police. As the officers untied me, I babbled out my story, knowing how insane it must sound. To their credit, they listened, taking in the strange artifacts and the altar with professional detachment. In the days that followed, as I gave statement after statement to increasingly higher-ranking officials, I learned that I wasn't the first to encounter the Watchers. There had been other disappearances, other strange occurrences in the area. My experience was just the latest in a pattern that stretched back decades. They never found the creature that had captured me, or any of its hooded companions. The farmhouse, when searched in daylight, yielded no secret passages, no hidden rooms, just dust, decay, and a lingering sense of wrongness that made even the most hardened officers uneasy. As for me, I quit my job as a courier. These days I spend my time researching, trying to make sense of what happened to me. Because I know deep in my bones that it's not over. The Watchers are still out there, waiting, planning, and someday they'll try again to open that door. When they do, I intend to be ready. But on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees and shadows seem to move of their own accord, I can't help but wonder, what if they had succeeded? What horrors were waiting on the other side of that gateway? And more terrifying still, what if in some way they did succeed? What if something came through, something that's now loose in our world? I may have escaped the farmhouse, but I fear the true nightmare is just beginning. Story 7. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. A trucker reported a lone figure walking along Highway 47 miles from the nearest town. As I flicked on my cruiser's lights and pulled onto the empty road, I had no idea I was about to encounter something that would shatter my understanding of reality. 20 years on the force hadn't prepared me for what I was about to see in the beam of my headlights. I'm Officer Sarah Reeves, and until that night, I thought I'd seen it all. Small-town police work isn't glamorous, but it has its share of weird. Drunk and disorderlies, domestic disputes, the occasional meth lab bust. But nothing could have prepared me for this. The night was unusually dark, a new moon hidden behind a blanket of clouds. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the empty stretch of asphalt ahead. The highway was dead at this hour, nothing but miles of darkness in either direction. I'd been driving for about 10 minutes when I saw it. A figure in the distance, shambling along the shoulder of the road. As I drew closer, I felt the first stirrings of unease. Something about its gait was off. I slowed the cruiser, pulling alongside the figure. "Evening," I called out, rolling down my window. "Everything all right out here?" No response. The figure kept walking, its face hidden by the hood of a dark sweatshirt. I frowned, putting the car in park and stepping out. "Sir? Ma'am? I'm going to need you to stop and talk to me for a moment." The figure halted but didn't turn. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Can I get your name?" I asked, one hand resting on my holster out of habit. "It's not safe to be out here at this hour. Where are you headed?" Slowly, so slowly it seemed almost mechanical, the figure began to turn. As it did, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Where a hand should have been, protruding from the sleeve of the sweatshirt, was something else. Something that glinted metallically in the beam of my flashlight. "What the?" I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. The figure completed its turn, and I found myself face to face with something that defied explanation. Its hood had fallen back, revealing a head that was a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and metal. One eye was human, blinking at me with an unsettling intelligence. The other was a glowing red orb, set in a socket of gleaming steel. I stumbled backwards, my training momentarily forgotten in the face of this impossibility. "Stop!" I shouted, drawing my weapon with shaking hands. "Don't move!" The thing, for I couldn't think of it as a person anymore, cocked its head to the side, regarding me with an almost curious expression. When it spoke, its voice was a discordant blend of human speech and electronic distortion. "Officer Sarah Reeves," it said, my name sounding alien in its synthesized tones. "You are not supposed to be here." A jolt of fear shot through me. How did it know my name? I hadn't introduced myself. "What are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "How do you know who I am?" The thing took a step towards me, its movements unnaturally smooth. "We know many things, Sarah Reeves. We know of the life growing inside you, though you have not yet realized it yourself. We know of the choice you will face, the sacrifice you will make." My free hand went instinctively to my stomach. Pregnant. That was impossible, wasn't it? "Stay back," I warned, but my voice lacked conviction. Fear and confusion warred within me, making it hard to think straight. The creature stopped, its human eye blinking slowly. "We mean you no harm, Sarah Reeves. We are merely observing, learning, preparing." "Preparing for what?" I asked, morbid curiosity overriding my fear for a moment. A smile spread across its face, half warm and human, half cold and metallic. The effect was deeply unsettling. "For the future, your future, humanity's future. The convergence is coming, Sarah Reeves, and you will play a crucial role." Before I could respond, the wail of a distant siren cut through the night. "Back up," I realized. Someone must have heard my radio chatter and sent help. I turned back to the creature, but it was already moving, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It sprinted towards the dark fields beside the highway, its form seeming to shimmer and distort as it ran. "Wait!" I shouted, giving chase on instinct, but it was no use. By the time I reached the edge of the road, the thing had vanished into the darkness. I stood there, panting as the sound of approaching sirens grew louder. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. It couldn't have been real. Some kind of hallucination, maybe? A prank gone wrong? But deep down, I knew. What I'd seen was all too real, and somehow I knew my life would never be the same. The next few hours passed in a blur of questioning and concerned looks from my colleagues. I told them what I'd seen, or at least a version of it. I left out the part about it knowing my name, about the pregnancy, about the convergence. Some things were too personal, too impossible to explain. They searched the area, of course, found nothing but some strange indentations in the field where the creature had disappeared. "Probably just some drunk in a Halloween costume," my sergeant said, patting me on the shoulder. "Get some rest, Reeves. You look like you've seen a ghost." If only it had been that simple. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that encounter. The creature's words echoed in my mind, keeping me awake at night. The convergence is coming. What did that mean? A week after the incident, I took a pregnancy test. Positive, just as the thing had said. That was when the dreams started. Vivid, terrifying visions of a world transformed. Cities overrun by beings like the one I'd encountered, humans merging with machines in ways that defied comprehension. And always, at the center of it all, a child. My child. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, my subconscious processing the trauma of that night. But the dreams felt too real, too consistent. And there were other things, small at first, but growing more noticeable. Electronics behaving strangely around me. A constant feeling of being watched. One night, unable to sleep, I drove out to the spot where I'd encountered the creature. As I stood there in the darkness, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, not surprised to see the familiar silhouette. "You're back," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The creature nodded, its red eye glowing softly in the night. "The time is approaching, Sarah Reeves. You must be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, a hand going protectively to my now visible bump. "What's going to happen?" "The convergence," it replied, as if that explained everything. "The merging of flesh and technology. The next step in human evolution. And your child? Your child will be the bridge." I shook my head, taking a step back. "No, I won't let you take my baby." The creature's human eye looked almost sad. "It is not a matter of letting, Sarah Reeves. It is inevitable. The future is already written, but you have a choice in how you face it." Before I could respond, it was gone, fading into the darkness as if it had never been there. I stood there for a long time, one hand on my stomach, the other clenched into a fist at my side. The creature was right about one thing. I did have a choice, not about what was coming, perhaps, but about how I would face it. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't run from this, wouldn't hide. If my child was destined to play a role in whatever this convergence was, then I would make damn sure they were prepared for it. As I drove home, a plan began to form in my mind. I would learn everything I could about what was coming. I would train, prepare, make myself strong enough to protect my child from whatever the future held. The world was changing, evolving into something beyond my comprehension. But one thing remained constant, a mother's love for her child. And no force on earth, no convergence of man and machine would ever change that. As I pulled into my driveway, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure watching me from the shadows. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Nothing but the quiet night and the promise of a future I couldn't yet imagine. Story 8. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly in the twilight, a lone beacon on this desolate stretch of highway. As I pulled my rig into the nearly empty parking lot, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt off about this place, but after 12 hours on the road, I was too hungry and tired to care. Little did I know the conversation I was about to overhear would plunge me into a nightmare I never signed up for. The name's Jake, and I've been hauling freight across the country for the better part of 2 decades. You see a lot of strange things out on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for what went down in that small-town diner. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and grease hitting me like a wall. The place was eerily quiet for a truck-stop diner. Usually these joints are buzzing with conversation and the clatter of plates, but here, you could hear a pin drop. I made my way to the counter, my boots echoing on the cracked linoleum. An older waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dot approached, coffee pot in hand. "What'll it be, hon?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Coffee black," I replied, matching her volume instinctively. "And the special, whatever it is." She nodded, pouring my coffee without another word. As she shuffled off to place my order, I took a moment to survey the diner. There were only 2 other customers, a pair of men huddled in a booth at the far end. They were speaking in hushed tones, heads close together. Something about their body language set me on edge. These weren't 2 buddies catching up over a late-night meal. This was something else entirely. I sipped my coffee, trying not to be obvious as I strained to hear their conversation. At first, I could only catch snippets. "Can't wait any longer. He's becoming a liability. Tonight. It has to be tonight." A chill ran down my spine. Were these guys planning something illegal? Dot returned with my plate, a sad-looking hamburger and a pile of limp fries. I thanked her, but my appetite had vanished. I picked at my food, all my attention focused on the men in the booth. One of them, a burly guy with a beard, leaned back, his voice rising just enough for me to hear clearly. "Look, I don't like it any more than you do, but the boss says he's got to go. He knows too much, and he's getting sloppy. One wrong word to the wrong person, and we're all screwed." The other man, smaller and nervous-looking, nodded reluctantly. I know, but Jesus, Mike, we grew up with the guy. It doesn't feel right." Bearded Mike leaned in again, his voice dropping. "Right or wrong doesn't matter. What matters is protecting the operation. You want to end up like Tommy? Because that's what'll happen if we don't take care of this problem." My blood ran cold. They were talking about murder. There was no doubt in my mind. I forced myself to take another bite of my burger, my mind racing. What should I do? Call the cops? But I had no proof, just a overheard conversation. And in a small town like this, who knew if the local law enforcement could be trusted? The nervous guy spoke again, his voice shaking. Okay, so how do we do it?" Mike's response was chilling in its casualness. "We take him for a ride out to the old quarry, make it look like an accident. A tragic DUI. His car goes over the edge. By the time they fish him out, any evidence will be long gone." I felt sick to my stomach. They were going to kill someone tonight, and I was the only one who knew. The men fell silent as Dot approached their table with the check. I watched as they paid and stood to leave, my heart pounding. As they passed my seat at the counter, Mike's eyes met mine for a brief moment. Did he see something in my expression? Did he know I'd overheard? The bell jingled as they exited, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Dot appeared in front of me, refilling my barely touched coffee. "Everything all right with your meal, hon?" she asked, eyeing my plate. I nodded, pushing it away. "Yeah, just not as hungry as I thought. Say, those two guys that just left, they regulars here, Dot's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Can't say I know them," she replied a little too quickly. "Just passing through, I reckon. Like yourself." But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of fear. She knew something, that much was clear. I paid my bill and headed out to my truck, my mind whirling. What should I do? Drive away and pretend I never heard anything? Try to warn the poor bastard they were planning to kill? Call the state police and hope they'd take me seriously? As I climbed into the cab, I spotted the two men getting into a battered pickup truck. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I started my rig and pulled out onto the highway, keeping a discreet distance behind them. For about 20 minutes, we drove through the darkness, the pickup's taillights, the only other sign of life on the road. Then they turned off onto a dirt track that wound into the hills. I pulled over, killing my lights. This was crazy. I was a trucker, not a detective or a vigilante. I had no business getting involved in whatever this was. But I couldn't shake the image of some poor guy, probably passed out drunk, being driven to his death. If I did nothing, I'd have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight and phone and set off down the dirt road on foot. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my boots. After about 10 minutes of walking, I heard voices up ahead. I clicked off my flashlight and crept forward, using the faint moonlight to guide me. I came to the edge of a clearing and ducked behind a large boulder. There, illuminated by the headlights of the pickup, was a scene straight out of a crime movie. Mike and the nervous guy were standing over a third man who was on his knees, hands bound behind his back. Even from this distance, I could see he was terrified. "Please," I heard him beg. "I swear I haven't told anyone. I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again." Mike's voice was cold. "Sorry, Jimmy, boss's orders. You know too much. I had to do something, but what?" I was unarmed, outnumbered, and way out of my depth. Then I remembered my phone. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" I spoke in a whisper, terrified of being overheard. "There's a murder about to happen. Old quarry off Highway 27, about 20 miles east of Millbrook. 2 men, 1 hostage. They're going to make it look like an accident. Please hurry." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but I knew it would take time for them to get here. Time Jimmy didn't have. I had to stall them somehow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from behind the boulder. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the quiet night. "What's going on here?" 3 heads whipped around to stare at me. For a moment, nobody moved. Then all hell broke loose. Mike reached for something at his waistband. A gun, I realized with horror. The nervous guy grabbed Jimmy, dragging him towards the edge of the quarry. I did the only thing I could think of. I charged forward, roaring like a madman, waving my flashlight like a weapon. The surprise of my attack bought me a precious few seconds. Mike hesitated, his hand on his gun. The nervous guy loosened his grip on Jimmy, who took the opportunity to drive an elbow into his captor's stomach. And then, like a miracle, I heard sirens in the distance. Mike's face contorted with rage. "You son of a bitch!" he snarled, raising his gun. But before he could fire, Jimmy tackled him from behind. The gun went off, the shot going wide, and both men went down in a tangle of limbs. The nervous guy took one look at the chaos, then turned and ran into the darkness. I rushed to Jimmy's aid, helping him subdue Mike just as the first police car screeched into the clearing, lights flashing. The next few hours were a blur of statements and questions. Jimmy, it turned out, was a low-level member of a drug trafficking ring who'd gotten cold feet. He'd been planning to go to the authorities, which is why the bosses had ordered his execution. As the sun began to rise, a state police detective approached me. "You took one hell of a risk tonight," he said, shaking his head. "But you saved a man's life and helped us crack open a case we've been working on for months. Good work." I nodded, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. All I wanted now was to get back to my rig and put this night behind me. But as I walked back to the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I'd stepped into something big, something dangerous. and somehow I knew my quiet life on the road would never be quite the same again. As I climbed into my truck and pulled onto the empty highway, the rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a new day, but for me, it felt like the beginning of a whole new life. One thing was certain: I'd never look at a small-town diner the same way again. Story 9. The moment our car sputtered and died on the outskirts of Millhaven, I knew we were in trouble. As my husband coasted to a stop on the shoulder, the setting sun cast long shadows across the deserted main street. The town looked frozen in time, all boarded up storefronts and faded advertisements. But it wasn't the eerie quiet that sent a chill down my spine. It was the way every curtain twitched as we passed, unseen eyes following our every move. Little did we know, our unplanned stop in this forgotten corner of America was about to become a nightmare we might never escape. I'm Sarah, and what should have been a fun family road trip to my sister's wedding had just taken a sharp turn into Stephen King territory. My husband Mike killed the ignition, the sudden silence broken only by our 2 kids bickering in the back seat. "What's wrong, Dad?" our 10-year-old son Jack asked, leaning forward between the seats. Mike frowned, peering at the dashboard. "Not sure, buddy. Engine just quit." I pulled out my phone, hoping to look up the nearest mechanic, but was met with a glaring "no service" message. Perfect. "There's got to be a gas station or something in town," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe someone can help." We piled out of the car, the summer heat hitting us like a wall even as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. Our 6-year-old daughter, Emma, clung to my hand as we made our way down the cracked sidewalk. "Mommy, I don't like it here," she whispered, eyes darting from one darkened window to another. "It feels scary." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's okay, sweetie, we won't be here long." But as we walked deeper into town, that promise felt increasingly hollow. Every building seemed abandoned, paint peeling and windows grimy. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the prickle on the back of my neck growing stronger with each step. Finally, we spotted a flickering neon sign: Hal's Auto and Gas. The ancient pumps looked like they hadn't seen use since the 70s, but it was our only hope. Mike approached the weathered door, rapping his knuckles against the frame. "Hello, anyone here? We could use some help." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, the door creaked open. The man who emerged was ancient, his deeply lined face a roadmap of a hard life. He squinted at us suspiciously. "Ain't from round here, are ya?" Mike shook his head. "No, sir, our car broke down just outside town. We were hoping you might be able to take a look." The old man, Hal I presumed, chewed on his lip for a moment before nodding curtly. "All right, show me where it's at." As we walked back to our stranded vehicle, I couldn't help but notice how the old man kept glancing around nervously as if expecting trouble. When we reached the car, he popped the hood and started poking around, muttering to himself. "Gonna take some work," he finally announced. "Can't do nothing tonight, have to order parts, maybe get it fixed up tomorrow, day after at the latest." My heart sank. "Is there a motel in town where we could stay?" Hal's eyes narrowed. "Old Mildred runs a boarding house down on Elm, only place for out-of-towners to stay." As if on cue, the streetlights flickered to life, casting pools of sickly yellow light on the empty sidewalks. In the growing darkness, the town seemed to close in around us, suddenly feeling much smaller and more claustrophobic. "I'll give Mildred a call. Let her know you're coming," Hal said, already shuffling back towards his shop. "Best get there quick. Folks around here don't much like strangers wandering after dark." With that ominous warning, he disappeared inside, the door shutting with a finality that made me shiver despite the lingering heat. We gathered our overnight bags from the car and set off in the direction Hal had indicated. As we walked, I noticed more movement behind curtains, more faces quickly ducking out of sight as we passed. The few people we did see on the street hurried by without making eye contact, as if afraid to be caught talking to outsiders. "Mike," I whispered, "something's not right here." He nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. "I know, but we don't have much choice. Let's just get to this boarding house and hunker down until the car's fixed." The boarding house, when we found it, looked like something out of a Gothic novel. Paint peeled from its weather-beaten clapboards and the porch sagged ominously. But a light shone in the window, and at this point any port in a storm would do. Before we could even knock, the door swung open. Mildred, it turned out, made Hal look young by comparison. Her wispy white hair formed a halo around a face so wrinkled it was hard to make out her features. But her eyes were sharp, boring into each of us in turn. "Well, come in then," she croaked. "Can't have you standing out there all night." The interior of the house was like stepping back in time. Faded wallpaper, doilies on every surface, and the pervasive smell of mothballs and cat litter. Mildred shuffled ahead of us up a creaking staircase. "2 rooms," she announced. "Parents in one, young'uns in the other. No wandering about at night, you hear? These old floors, they talk. I'll know if you're up and about when you shouldn't be." With that cheerful warning, she left us to settle in. The rooms were small, musty, and dimly lit, but at least they were clean. As I tucked Emma into the narrow twin bed, I tried to put on a brave face. "It's just for a night or 2, sweetie," I said, smoothing her hair. "Like a little adventure." She nodded solemnly. "Mommy, why don't the people here like us?" I hesitated, caught off guard by her perceptiveness. "I'm sure they're just not used to visitors, that's all. Small towns can be like that sometimes." But as I kissed her goodnight and retreated to the room I was sharing with Mike, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The hostility was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Sleep was elusive that night. Every creak of the old house had me on edge, imagining shadowy figures creeping through the halls. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with twisted faces and grasping hands, always just out of sight but drawing ever closer. I jolted awake to the sound of voices outside. Pale early morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains as I crept to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A crowd had gathered on the street below. At least 24 people standing in a loose circle, all staring up at the boarding house. Even from this distance, I could see the hostility in their postures, the anger in their expressions. "Mike," I hissed, shaking him awake. "Mike, you need to see this." He joined me at the window, his face growing grave as he took in the scene. "What the hell?" Before we could decide what to do, there was a sharp rap at the door. Mildred's reedy voice called out, "You folks best come down now, they're waiting for you." My heart pounded as we quickly dressed and roused the kids. Emma clung to me, eyes wide with fear, as we descended the creaking stairs. Mildred stood by the open front door, her expression unreadable. "Don't you worry none," she said, though her tone was far from reassuring. "They just want to talk to you is all." As we stepped out onto the porch, the crowd fell silent. Dozens of eyes bored into us, filled with a mixture of suspicion, anger, and something else. Fear? A man stepped forward, his weathered face set in hard lines. "We don't like strangers in Millhaven," he said, his voice carrying easily in the morning stillness. "Bad things happen when outsiders come poking around." Mike stepped in front of us protectively. "Look, we don't want any trouble. Our car broke down, that's all. As soon as it's fixed, we'll be on our way." The man's eyes narrowed. "It ain't that simple. You've seen too much already. We got secrets here, secrets that need protecting." A murmur ran through the crowd, heads nodding in agreement. I clutched the kids closer, my mind racing. What could this isolated little town possibly be hiding that would warrant this kind of reaction? Just then, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. A young woman pushed her way forward, her face flushed with emotion. "Stop it!" she shouted. "Can't you see you're scaring them? They're just a family passing through. This has gone on long enough." The mood of the crowd shifted, uncertainty replacing some of the hostility. The man who had spoken turned to the young woman, his expression softening slightly. "Jenny, you know why we have to do this. After what happened last time," she cut him off. "That was different, and you know it. These people haven't done anything wrong. We can't keep living like this, afraid of our own shadows, treating every outsider like a threat." As the argument continued, I noticed more of the townspeople nodding along with Jenny's words. The united front was cracking, revealing the fear and doubt beneath. Finally, the man sighed heavily. Maybe you're right. We've let fear rule us for too long." He turned back to us, his expression weary. "Looks like you folks caught us on a bad day. Hal'll have your car fixed up soon as he can, and then, well, I reckon what you do after that is up to you." The crowd began to disperse, many of them looking ashamed or conflicted. As they drifted away, Jenny approached us, her smile tentative but genuine. "I'm so sorry about all this," she said. It's a long story. But if you're willing to listen, I think it's time we finally told it. To you and to ourselves. As we followed her back into the boarding house, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds. Millhaven suddenly looked different in the clear light. Not welcoming exactly, but no longer quite so menacing. I didn't know what secrets this town was hiding or what story we were about to hear. But as I looked at the faces around me, my family, Jenny, even old Mildred hovering in the background, I felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to break through years of fear and isolation. Maybe our accidental detour into Millhaven wasn't just about getting our car fixed. Maybe we were here to help heal a wound we didn't even know existed. As Jenny began to speak, her voice low and intense, I settled in to listen. Whatever came next, I had a feeling our lives would never be quite the same again. Story 10. The stench of decay hit me first. A sickly sweet odor that cut through the usual miasma of rot and garbage. But it was the flash of red that caught my eye, a stark contrast against the dull gray of the bin's contents. As I reached in to investigate, my blood ran cold. The scrap of fabric I pulled out wasn't just red. It was stained with something darker, something unmistakably sinister. And as I stood there, frozen in shock, I felt the weight of unseen eyes boring into me from a nearby window. Little did I know my routine garbage run was about to plunge me into a nightmare I never signed up for. My name's Derek, and until that moment, I was just another cog in the city's waste management machine. 3 years on the job, and I thought I'd seen it all, from the bizarre to the disgusting. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found in that residential bin on a quiet Tuesday morning. The day had started like any other. I'd clocked in at 4 a.m., climbed into my truck, and set off on my usual route through the suburbs. The pre-dawn streets were empty, the only sound the rumble of my engine and the occasional clatter of bins being emptied. I just turned onto Maple Street when I noticed something odd. The bin outside number 37 was overflowing, which was unusual for this neat, well-maintained neighborhood. As I approached, that's when the smell hit me, rotten and cloying, strong enough to make my eyes water even from a distance. "Great," I muttered to myself. "Probably some idiot didn't wrap their meat properly before tossing it." But as I tipped the bin into the truck, something caught my eye. A flash of red among the bags and boxes. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. It's not my job to inspect what people throw away, but something about this felt off. Against my better judgment, I reached in and pulled out the scrap of fabric. It was a piece of clothing, a t-shirt maybe, or part of a dress, but it was the dark stains that made my stomach lurch. Deep, rusty brown patches that could only be one thing: blood. My mind raced. There had to be an innocent explanation, right? Maybe someone had a nosebleed or cut themselves cooking, but the amount of blood, the way it had soaked into the fabric, this was no minor injury. That's when I felt it. The prickle on the back of my neck that told me I was being watched. Slowly, I turned towards the house. There, in an upstairs window, I saw a face, pale, drawn, with eyes that seemed to bore right through me. It was gone in an instant, the curtain falling back into place, but the image was seared into my brain. I stood there, the blood-stained fabric clutched in my gloved hand, paralyzed with indecision. What should I do? Call the cops? Pretend I never saw anything and continue my route? Before I could decide, the front door of the house creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," he called, his voice friendly but with an undercurrent of tension. "Is there a problem?" I quickly shoved the fabric into my pocket, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, sir, just a small issue with the bin, all sorted now." He nodded, but his eyes never left my face. "Glad to hear it. You know, we don't see many new faces around here. How long have you been on this route?" The question was casual, but there was an intensity to his gaze that made me uneasy. "Oh, not long," I lied. "Just filling in for a colleague." "I see," he said, taking a step closer. "Well, we appreciate the work you do. Keeping our streets clean, maintaining order. It's important work, wouldn't you agree?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away. "You know," he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "in a job like yours, I imagine you see all sorts of things. Things that might raise questions. But sometimes it's better not to ask those questions. Safer, you might say. The threat was clear, even if his tone remained conversational. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "No questions from me, sir. I'm just here to do my job." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good man. You have a nice day now." As he turned and walked back into the house, I let out a shaky breath. I climbed into my truck, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. What the hell had I just stumbled into? The rest of my route passed in a blur. I went through the motions, but my mind kept circling back to that blood-stained fabric, the face in the window, the man's thinly veiled threat. By the time I pulled into the depot at the end of my shift, I had come to a decision. I couldn't just let this go. Whatever was happening in that house, someone was in danger, maybe even dead already. But I couldn't go to the police, not without evidence. The scrap of fabric wasn't enough. For all I knew, it could have come from anywhere. And if I was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation, I could lose my job. Or worse, if that man's threat was serious. No, I needed more information. I needed to go back. That night, after my wife and kids were asleep, I drove back to Maple Street. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses dark. Number 37 was lit up, shadows moving behind drawn curtains. I parked a block away and approached on foot, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The overflowing bin was gone. Regular collection must have come through earlier. But there was a smaller trash can by the side of the house, probably meant for yard waste. Glancing around to make sure I wasn't seen, I lifted the lid. The smell hit me immediately. That same sickly sweet odor of decay. And there, partially wrapped in a garbage bag, was what looked like... Oh God, was that a hand? I stumbled back, fighting the urge to vomit. This was real. This was happening. There was a body, or at least part of one, in that trash can. Just then, a light flicked on in the house. I heard voices, angry and getting louder. Without thinking, I ducked behind a large shrub, my heart racing. The side door burst open and two men emerged. One was the man I'd spoken to earlier. The other was younger, agitated, gesticulating wildly. "Can't keep doing this," the younger man was saying. "Someone's going to notice. That garbage man this morning is taken care of," the older man cut in, his voice cold. "He won't be a problem, but you're right, we need to be more careful. No more accidents." The younger man ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. "This isn't what I signed up for. I wanted out of this life, not to get in deeper." "You don't get to decide that," the older man snapped. "You're in this whether you like it or not. Now help me with this. We need to get rid of it properly this time." They moved towards the trash can, and I knew I had to act. I couldn't let them dispose of the evidence. But what could I do? I was unarmed, outnumbered, and in way over my head. That's when I remembered my phone. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and started recording. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that something sinister really was happening here. As the men lifted the heavy trash can between them, grunting with the effort, I caught a clear shot of their faces. Then, moving as quietly as I could, I crept back to my car. I drove home in a daze, my mind whirling. What should I do now? Go to the police? But would they believe me? And what if these men had connections? People who could make evidence and witnesses disappear? As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. A chill ran down my spine. Had I been followed? I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. My wife stirred as I entered our bedroom. "Derek, everything okay?" she mumbled, still half asleep. I hesitated. How could I explain what was happening? How could I involve her in this danger? "Everything's fine," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Go back to sleep." As I lay there in the darkness, unable to sleep, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. I had stumbled onto something dark, something dangerous. And now I had a choice to make. I could try to forget what I'd seen, go back to my normal life and pretend none of this had happened. Or I could pursue this, try to uncover the truth and bring these men to justice. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, I made my decision. I couldn't walk away from this. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, I had to see this through. I just hoped I'd live long enough to see justice done. Story 11. The fog rolled in thick and fast, swallowing the winding mountain road in a matter of minutes. As I squinted through the windshield, barely able to see 10 feet ahead, my headlights caught a figure on the roadside, a man waving his arms frantically. I slowed down, wrestling with the decision to stop. Little did I know, this moment of compassion would plunge me into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Alex, and until that night I was just another weekend warrior escaping the city for some much-needed time in the great outdoors. I'd been driving for hours, eager to reach the campsite before dark. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fog rolled in, I realized I might have to find somewhere to wait out the night. That's when I saw him, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt and jeans, looking thoroughly out of place on this desolate stretch of road. As I pulled over, I could see the relief wash over his face. "Oh, thank God," he said, hurrying over to my window. "My car broke down a mile back. I've been trying to get a signal on my phone, but out here..." He gestured helplessly at the surrounding wilderness. I nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, reception's pretty spotty in these parts. Hop in, I can give you a lift to the next town." He smiled gratefully, introducing himself as Tom as he climbed into the passenger seat. As we set off, I couldn't help but notice how tense he seemed, constantly glancing in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Tom startled slightly, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Oh yeah, just a bit shaken up, I guess. It's pretty creepy out here in the fog." I had to agree with him there. The fog had only grown thicker, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. The trees on either side of the road loomed like sentinels, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the swish of the wipers fighting a losing battle against the mist. Then, without warning, Tom spoke up. "We need to turn around." I glanced at him, confused. "What? Why?" His face was pale, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine fear. I think something's following us." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Great, I'd picked up a paranoid hitchhiker. But as I opened my mouth to reassure him, a sound cut through the night. A long, low howl that definitely didn't belong to any animal I recognized. Tom's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Did you hear that? We need to go back now." "Whoa, calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chill that had run down my spine. "It's probably just a coyote or something. We're in the middle of nowhere, remember?" But even as I said it, I found myself peering into the rearview mirror. The fog made it impossible to see anything beyond a few feet behind us, but for a moment, I could have sworn I saw movement, a dark shape loping along the road. I shook my head, chiding myself for letting Tom's paranoia get to me. "Look, there's a turnout up ahead. I'll pull over and we can take a breather, okay?" Tom nodded jerkily, his eyes never leaving the side mirror. I guided the car into the small gravel area, killing the engine but leaving the headlights on. The silence that fell was oppressive, broken only by our breathing and the occasional ping of the cooling engine. "All right," I said, turning to face Tom. "What's really going on here? Because I get the feeling there's more to this story than a broken-down car." For a long moment, Tom said nothing, his gaze fixed on the fog-shrouded road behind us. Then slowly he began to speak. "I'm a forest ranger," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or I was until last month. I quit after what I saw." I leaned in, intrigued despite myself. "What did you see?" Tom's eyes met mine, and the raw fear I saw there made my blood run cold. "Something that shouldn't exist. Something that's been living in these woods, picking off hikers and campers for years. The locals know. They call it the Shadow Keeper. Most folks think it's just a legend, a scary story to keep kids from wandering off. But it's real. And now I think it's hunting me." I sat back, torn between skepticism and the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. "Come on, man, you're talking about some kind of monster? In this day and age?" Tom shook his head vehemently. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you it's real. I saw it with my own eyes, tracked it to its lair. And now it knows I know." Before I could respond, that howl split the night again, closer this time, and unmistakably not a coyote. It was deeper, more guttural, with an almost human quality that sent shivers down my spine. Tom's face went ashen. "It's here," he whispered. I turned the key in the ignition, my hands shaking. The engine sputtered once, twice, but wouldn't catch. "No, no, no," I muttered, trying again. "Nothing. We need to run," Tom said, his voice urgent. "Now, before it's too late." Part of me wanted to argue, to insist this was all some elaborate prank, but the fear in Tom's eyes, the eerie howl still echoing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in very real danger. We burst out of the car, the fog immediately enveloping us. I could barely see Tom beside me as we stumbled down the road, our footsteps muffled by the thick mist. That's when I heard it, a heavy rhythmic thudding behind us, like footsteps, but too big, too powerful to belong to anything I wanted to encounter. "Don't look back," Tom gasped as we ran. "Whatever you do, don't look back." But of course I couldn't help myself. I turned my head, peering into the fog, and my heart nearly stopped. A shape was emerging from the mist. Massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a vaguely humanoid form but proportions all wrong. Its arms were too long, ending in wickedly curved claws. And its face... God, its face was the stuff of nightmares. No eyes that I could see, just a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth. I let out a strangled cry, my feet faltering. Tom grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Run!" he screamed. We tore down the road, the creature's thunderous footsteps growing ever closer. The fog seemed to part before it, as if even nature itself feared this abomination. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I saw a glimmer of hope lights in the distance. A gas station, its neon sign a beacon in the mist. "There!" I gasped, pointing. We made a final, desperate sprint for safety. Behind us, the creature let out a roar that shook the very air around us. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, smell the rotten stench of its body. We burst into the fluorescent-lit forecourt of the gas station, startling the lone attendant inside. Without stopping, we ran straight for the door, slamming it shut behind us. "Lock it!" Tom yelled. "For God's sake, lock it!" The attendant, a teenager who looked thoroughly confused and more than a little scared, fumbled with the keys. Just as the lock clicked into place, something massive slammed into the door. We all stumbled back, watching in horror as the door bulged inward. The glass cracked but held for now. "What the hell is that thing?" the attendant cried, his voice cracking. "Call the police," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Tell them there's a bear attack or something." As the kid rushed to the phone, I turned to Tom. He was slumped against a shelf, his face pale and drawn. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded wearily. "Yeah, thanks for believing me. Most people don't." Outside, the creature roared again, but it sounded further away now. The fluorescent lights seemed to be keeping it at bay. "So," I said, sliding down to sit beside Tom. "Want to tell me the whole story? Seems like we might be here for a while." As Tom began to speak, filling in the horrifying details of his encounters with the Shadowkeeper, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly my life had changed. In the span of an hour, I'd gone from a simple camping trip to being trapped in a gas station by a monster straight out of a nightmare. But as I listened to Tom's tale, a part of me felt excited. This was bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. A real-life mystery, a danger that went beyond the mundane threats of everyday life. As the night wore on and we waited for help to arrive, I made a decision. Once this was over, once we were safe, I wasn't going to just go back to my normal life. I was going to dig deeper, find out more about this creature and others like it. Because if the Shadowkeeper was real, what other legends might be true? What other secrets were hiding in the dark corners of the world just waiting to be discovered? As the first light of dawn began to filter through the fog, I realized my life would never be the same again. And strangely enough, I was okay with that. The world had just gotten a whole lot bigger, a whole lot scarier, and a whole lot more interesting. Story 12. The rhythmic tapping echoed through the stillness of the night, a slow, steady beat that sent chills down my spine. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe a loose branch scratching against metal. But as the minutes ticked by and the sound persisted, a creeping dread settled in my gut. Something was in that truck, something alive and desperate. And as I lay there in my own cab, debating whether to investigate, I had no idea I was about to stumble into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Mike, and I've been hauling freight across the country for the better part of 2 decades. I thought I'd seen it all. Strange hitchhikers, unexplained lights in the sky, the eerie loneliness of deserted highways at 3 a.m. but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that night at the Hollow Creek rest stop. It had been a long day on the road. I'd pushed harder than usual, trying to make up time after a delay at my last pickup. By the time I pulled into the rest stop, my eyes were heavy and my back was screaming for a break. The place was nearly deserted. Just my rig and one other truck in the oversized vehicle lot. I went through my usual routine. A quick trip to the bathroom, a thermos refilled with mediocre vending machine coffee, and a few stretches to work out the kinks in my shoulders. As I climbed back into my cab, ready to catch a few hours of shut-eye, that's when I first noticed the other truck. It was an older model Peterbilt, its once shiny chrome now dull and spotted with rust. The engine was running, a low rumble that seemed out of place in the quiet night. But what really caught my attention was the complete absence of movement or light from the cab. If someone was in there, they were sitting in total darkness. Probably just catching some sleep, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the odd feeling creeping over me. I settled into my bunk, hoping the coffee wouldn't keep me up too long. I was just drifting off when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the direction of the other truck. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I tried to ignore it. Lord knows I've heard all sorts of strange noises at these rest stops over the years, but there was something about this sound, something deliberate and urgent that niggled at the back of my mind. After about 10 minutes of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up, peering out my window towards the other truck. The tapping continued, steady and insistent. I debated with myself for a moment. It wasn't my business, really. For all I knew, the other driver was just fidgety, tapping out a tune to pass the time. But a nagging voice in my head wouldn't let it go. What if something was wrong? What if they needed help? With a sigh, I pulled on my boots and jacket. The night air was crisp as I stepped down from my cab, gravel crunching under my feet as I approached the other truck. As I got closer, the tapping grew louder. It was definitely coming from inside the trailer. My heart began to race. This wasn't just someone killing time. This was a call for help. I knocked on the cab door. "Hey, buddy, you all right in there?" No response. The engine continued to idle, but there was no movement from inside the cab. The tapping from the trailer, however, grew more frantic. I tried the door handle. Locked. Swallowing hard, I made my way to the back of the trailer. The rear doors were secured with a heavy padlock. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. "Is someone in there? Do you need help?" The tapping stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a voice. "Help, please." My blood ran cold. There was someone trapped in there, and judging by the weakness of their voice, they'd been there for a while. I rushed back to my truck, grabbing a crowbar from my toolbox. It took all my strength, but I managed to break the padlock. As I swung the doors open, the stench that poured out nearly knocked me over. Sweat, urine, and something worse, something I didn't want to think about. In the dim light spilling from the rest stop, I could make out a huddled form in the corner of the trailer. A woman, young, her clothes torn and dirty. She blinked at me, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the horror and rage building inside me. "I'm here to help. Can you walk a—" She nodded weakly, struggling to her feet. I helped her out of the trailer, my mind racing. Who had done this? Where was the driver? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I heard the cab door of the truck open. Heavy footsteps approached from around the side of the trailer. "Everything all right back here?" A gruff voice called out. "Thought I heard some noise." The man stopped short as he rounded the corner, taking in the scene before him. He was big, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a bushy beard and cold, dark eyes. Those eyes flicked from me to the woman, and in that instant I saw something change in them, a flash of murderous rage quickly masked by false concern. "Oh, thank God you found her," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "My sister, she's not well, you see, ran away from home. I've been looking everywhere for her." The woman's grip on my arm tightened, her whole body trembling. Without taking my eyes off the man, I shifted slightly, putting myself between him and her. "That's so," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Funny, she doesn't look much like you. And I can't think of many good reasons a man would lock his sister in the back of a trailer." The man's face darkened. "Now listen here, this is a family matter. You just hand her over and we can all forget this ever happened." I felt the woman press something into my hand, a small object, cool and metallic, a key. In that moment, I understood this was the key to the truck, her silent plea for help. "Tell you what," I said, tightening my grip on the crowbar. "Why don't we call the police? Let them sort this out." The man's expression twisted into a snarl. "You should have minded your own business, old man." He lunged forward, meaty hands reaching for my throat, but I was ready for him. I swung the crowbar, catching him square in the jaw. He stumbled back, spitting blood and teeth. "Run!" I shouted to the woman. "Get in my truck and lock the doors." She took off towards my rig as I faced down her captor. He came at me again, his face a mask of fury. We grappled, his superior size and strength nearly overwhelming me. But years on the road had toughened me up, and I fought with the desperation of a man who knew lives were on the line. I managed to break free, scrambling towards my truck. The woman had the passenger door open, urging me on. I dove inside just as the man reached us, slamming the door shut and locking it. His fists pounded on the window as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into gear, peeling out of the rest stop with a spray of gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man run back to his truck. "Hold on," I told the woman. "This isn't over yet." Sure enough, headlights appeared behind us, gaining quickly. The Peterbilt had more power than my rig, and on a straight stretch of highway, he'd overtake us easily. "There's a town about 10 miles ahead," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "If we can make it there—" My words were cut off as the Peterbilt slammed into our rear, the impact jolting us forward. The woman screamed, clinging to the dashboard. "Come on, baby," I muttered to my truck. "Just a little further." The next few minutes were a blur of screeching tires and grinding metal as the madman behind us tried to run us off the road. But just when I thought we couldn't take another hit, I saw it. The lights of the town, and better yet, the flashing blues and reds of a police cruiser. The Peterbilt dropped back as we entered the town limits. I pulled up alongside the police car, my hands shaking as I rolled down the window. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of statements and medical checks. The woman, whose name I learned was Sarah, was taken to the hospital. The police put out an APB on the Peterbilt and its driver. As the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had happened sank in, I found myself sitting on the curb outside the police station, a cold cup of coffee in my trembling hands. A detective approached, crouching down beside me. "Mr. Thompson, we're going to need you to come in for a formal statement tomorrow, but I wanted you to know we got him. State troopers picked him up about 50 miles north of here." I nodded, relief washing over me. "And Sarah, is she going to be okay?" The detective's expression softened. "Thanks to you, yes. She's got a long road ahead, but she's alive. You're a hero, Mr. Thompson, but I didn't feel like a hero." As I climbed back into my truck that night, all I could think about was how close it had been. If I'd ignored that tapping, if I'd minded my own business like the monster had said. As I pulled back onto the highway, continuing my route like it was just another night, I knew things would never be the same. The open road, once a source of freedom and possibility, now held a darker edge. What other secrets were hidden behind the wheels of passing trucks? What other horrors lurked at lonely rest stops in the dead of night? One thing was certain: I'd never again ignore that nagging feeling, that instinct that tells you something isn't right. Because sometimes being nosy isn't just about curiosity. Sometimes it's the thing that stands between life and death, between evil triumphing and justice being served. And as for me, well, I've got a lot more miles ahead and a lot more stories to tell. But none, I suspect, will ever quite match the night I heard that tapping and decided to answer its call. Story 13. The neon lights of the parking garage flickered ominously as I pulled in, casting eerie shadows that danced across the concrete pillars. My heart raced, palms sweaty on the handlebars of my motorcycle. The package in my courier bag suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. As I cut the engine, the silence that fell was oppressive, broken only by the echo of footsteps approaching from opposite directions. In that moment, I realized I'd inadvertently become a player in a game far more dangerous than any delivery I'd made before. My name's Alex, and until that night, I was just another motorcycle courier trying to make ends meet in the gig economy. The job had come in late, a rushed delivery with a payout too good to pass up. All I had to do was pick up a small package from a nondescript office building and drop it off at this parking garage. Easy money, or so I thought. The office where I'd collected the package had been weird enough, all blacked-out windows and a receptionist who looked more like a bouncer, but it was the instructions for the drop-off that really set off alarm bells. Level 3, north corner. Flash your headlight twice. Wait for the contact. Don't open the package. As I stood there, straddling my bike, I saw them emerge from the shadows, 2 groups approaching from different directions. On my left, 3 men in expensive suits, their faces hard and expressionless. On my right, a group of 4, dressed more casually but with a tension in their movements that screamed, "Dangerous!" The suited man in the lead spoke first, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You have something that belongs to us, courier. Hand it over and you can be on your way." Before I could respond, a woman from the other group stepped forward. "Don't listen to him, that package is ours. Give it to us and we'll make it worth your while." My mouth went dry. This wasn't just some corporate deal gone sideways. The air was thick with tension, and I had a sinking feeling that these people weren't afraid to get violent to get what they wanted. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm just the delivery guy. I don't know anything about what's in this package or who it's supposed to go to. My instructions were to wait for a contact." "I'm the contact," both the suit and the woman said simultaneously. They glared at each other, hands twitching towards concealed weapons. Great, just great. I was caught in the middle of what looked like a gang war or some kind of espionage showdown, all for a package small enough to fit in my courier bag. "Okay, let's all just calm down," I said, raising my hands placatingly. "There's got to be a way to sort this out without anyone getting hurt." The suit laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're in over your head, kid. This is bigger than you can imagine. Just hand over the package and we'll pretend you were never here." The woman from the other group took another step forward. "Don't do it. You have no idea what they'll do with what's in that package. Lives are at stake here." My mind raced. Who were these people? What could possibly be in this tiny package that was worth all this trouble? And more importantly, how the hell was I going to get out of this mess? I slowly reached for my courier bag, and both groups tensed. "Easy," I said. "I'm just going to put the package on the ground, okay? Then I'll step back and you guys can sort this out amongst yourselves." "Don't even think about it," the suit snarled. "You open that bag and things are going to get very unpleasant very quickly." The woman nodded in agreement. "For once we agree on something. That package stays with you until we resolve this." I froze, my hand halfway to my bag. "So what exactly am I supposed to do here? In case you haven't noticed, I'm kind of stuck in the middle of your little standoff." The suit stepped closer, his eyes cold. "What you're going to do is come with us, nice and easy. Once we're clear of these interlopers, we'll take possession of the package. Like hell," the woman spat. "He's coming with us. We can protect him." "Protect me? From what?" The more they talked, the more confused and terrified I became. This was so far beyond a normal delivery gone wrong. "Look," I said, desperately trying to find a way out of this mess. "Why don't you both just back off and I'll call the client who hired me? Maybe they can clear this up." The suit's hand moved lightning fast, producing a pistol seemingly out of nowhere. "I'm done playing games. You're coming with us now." Everything happened at once. The woman's group surged forward, weapons appearing in their hands. The suit's companions spread out, creating a defensive formation. And me? I did the only thing I could think of. I gunned the engine of my motorcycle and took off. The sound of shouting and gunfire erupted behind me as I sped towards the exit ramp. Bullets pinged off concrete pillars, the echo deafening in the enclosed space. I leaned low over the handlebars, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst out of the garage and onto the street, tires squealing as I took the first corner I saw. Behind me, I could hear car engines roaring to life. The chase was on. For the next 20 minutes, I weaved through traffic, taking random turns, doing everything I could to lose my pursuers. My mind was reeling. What the hell had I gotten myself into? What was in this package that was worth killing for? Finally, after what felt like hours, I pulled into an alley and cut the engine. I sat there, breathing hard, listening for any sign that I'd been followed. Nothing but the normal sounds of the city at night. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. I needed help, but who could I call? The police? What would I even tell them? I doubted they'd believe my story about warring factions fighting over a mystery package. That's when I noticed the notification. A new email from the client who'd hired me for this delivery. With a sense of dread, I opened it. Package delivered successfully. Payment transferred. Delete this email and forget everything you saw tonight. For your own safety. I stared at the screen, disbelief warring with growing anger. They knew. They had to have known what they were sending me into, and now they expected me to just forget it ever happened. As I sat there in that dark alley, the package still weighing heavily in my courier bag, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. I couldn't just go back to normal after this. I needed answers. Who were those people in the garage? What was in this package? And most importantly, who was this mysterious client who'd thrown me into the middle of what felt like an international thriller? I took a deep breath, making a decision. I wasn't going to delete that email. I wasn't going to forget. Instead, I was going to dig deeper, find out what was really going on. It was risky, maybe even stupid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something big, something important. And now that I was involved, I couldn't just walk away. I started the engine again, a plan already forming in my mind. First stop, a friend who worked in IT. If anyone could trace that email back to its source, it was him. As I pulled out of the alley and back onto the streets of the city, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. My life as a simple motorcycle courier was over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with danger, intrigue, and the promise of uncovering secrets that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. I didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was certain. I was in for one hell of a ride. The city lights blurred around me as I sped through the night, the weight of the package a constant reminder of the choice I'd made. There was no going back now. Whatever was in that package, whoever was after it, I was determined to find out the truth. Little did I know this was just the beginning. The events in that parking garage had set in motion a chain of events that would lead me down a rabbit hole of conspiracy, danger, and revelation. My simple life as a courier was over, replaced by a world of shadows and secrets. But as I rode through the night, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. For better or worse, my life had just become a whole lot more interesting. And I was ready to face whatever came next, one delivery at a time. Story 14. The first crack of lightning illuminated the decrepit barn in stark relief, revealing its weather-beaten boards and sagging roof for a split second before plunging it back into darkness. As I pedaled furiously towards this dubious shelter, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrent that soaked me to the bone in seconds. Little did I know, as I wrenched open the creaking door and stumbled inside, that I was about to encounter something far more terrifying than any storm. My name's Jamie, and until that moment, I was just another food delivery cyclist trying to make ends meet in a city that seemed determined to grind me down. The night had started like any other, a string of deliveries, mostly to bored office workers pulling late nights and students cramming for exams. But as I'd headed out for what I hoped would be my last run of the night, the weather had taken a turn for the worse. The app had directed me to an address on the outskirts of town, an area I wasn't particularly familiar with. As I'd pedaled further from the city center, the streets had become darker, the houses more spread out. Then the rain had started, a light drizzle quickly escalating into a full-blown tempest. By the time I spotted the old barn looming out of the darkness, I was desperate for any kind of shelter. My waterlogged phone had long since given up, leaving me stranded in unfamiliar territory with no way to contact anyone. The barn, dilapidated as it was, seemed like a godsend. I wheeled my bike inside, the sound of the door slamming shut behind me nearly drowned out by a deafening clap of thunder. For a moment I just stood there, water pooling at my feet, trying to catch my breath and let my eyes adjust to the gloom. The interior of the barn was cavernous, filled with shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in the intermittent flashes of lightning. The air was thick with the musty scent of old hay and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast space. "Is anyone here? I'm just looking for shelter from the storm." No response, just the patter of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. I propped my bike against a nearby post and began to explore, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. The barn seemed long abandoned, filled with rusted farm equipment and moldering bales of hay. But as I moved deeper into the space, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A scuttling noise from above made me jump, nearly dropping my phone. I swung the beam upwards, half expecting to see some monstrous face leering down at me from the rafters. Instead, I caught a glimpse of something small and furry disappearing into the shadows. Just a rat, I told myself. Nothing to be afraid of. But then I heard something else, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart began to race. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "This isn't funny." Another growl, closer this time. And then in the beam of my flashlight, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. Eyes, dozens of pairs of eyes, glowing in the darkness like embers. They were arranged in a loose semicircle surrounding me, cutting off my escape to the door. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. What were these things? Some kind of wild animals that had taken shelter in the barn? But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't right. The eyes were too high off the ground, the formations too deliberate. As if in response to my thoughts, one of the creatures stepped forward into the light. I had to stifle a scream. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to humanity ended. Its body was covered in coarse, matted fur. Its limbs were too long, too jointed, ending in wickedly curved claws, and its face... God, its face was a nightmare made flesh. A elongated snout filled with razor-sharp teeth, eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence, ears that twitched and swiveled like a bat's. For a long moment we just stared at each other, predator and prey locked in a frozen tableau. Then it spoke. "Welcome," it growled, the word mangled by its inhuman mouth but unmistakable. "We've been waiting for you." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't exist in the real world. I had to be dreaming, or maybe I'd crashed my bike and was hallucinating as I bled out on some lonely road. But the cold fear gripping my heart, the sweat beading on my brow, those felt all too real. What are you?" I managed to choke out. The creature's mouth stretched into what I could only assume was a grin, revealing even more of those terrible teeth. "We are the Forgotten," it said. "The ones your kind abandoned to the dark places of the world. But now we're ready to claim what's ours." As it spoke, the other creatures began to move forward, emerging from the shadows. Each was similar to the first, but with subtle differences, some larger, some smaller, some with fur of different colors. All shared that same terrible visage, those same glowing eyes fixed hungrily upon me. I knew I should run, should fight, should do something, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a fear more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. "Please," I whispered, hating the weakness in my voice but unable to muster anything stronger. "I don't understand. I'm just a delivery person. I'm nobody important." The lead creature cocked its head to the side, an unsettlingly human gesture. "Important? No, perhaps not. But useful? Oh, yes. You see, we've been trapped here for so long, unable to venture out, to hunt as we once did. But you can go where we cannot. You can bring others to us." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of its words sank in. They wanted to use me as bait, to lure more victims to this godforsaken place. "I won't," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "I won't help you hurt anyone." The creature's eyes narrowed, its grin fading. "You misunderstand. This isn't a request. This is your new purpose, your only purpose." It took a step towards me, claws flexing. The others began to close in, their growls rising in a terrifying chorus. In that moment, survival instinct finally overcame fear. I turned and ran, not towards the door, they had that blocked off, but deeper into the barn. I had no plan, no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I could hear them behind me, their howls echoing off the walls. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the darkness, vaulting over fallen beams and rusted equipment. Suddenly, my foot caught on something. I went down hard, my chin slamming into the dirt floor. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment I thought it was over, but as I lay there, dazed, my hand brushed against something. Metal, cool and smooth. I gripped it, pulling it towards me. It was heavy, awkward, but as another flash of lightning illuminated the barn, I saw what I was holding. An old pitchfork, its tines rusty but still sharp. I struggled to my feet, weapon in hand, just as the first of the creatures rounded the corner. It lunged at me, claws extended. Without thinking, I thrust the pitchfork forward. The creature's momentum impaled it on the tines. It let out a shriek of pain and fury, thrashing wildly. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it hit the ground. I staggered back, shocked by what I'd done, but I didn't have time to process it. More of them were coming, their glowing eyes filled with rage. What followed was a blur of violence and terror. I swung the pitchfork wildly, keeping them at bay. Each time one got too close, I jabbed out, drawing blood and screams. But there were so many of them, and I was tiring quickly. Just when I thought I couldn't hold out any longer, a new sound cut through the chaos. Sirens, police sirens, growing closer by the second. The creatures froze, their heads swiveling towards the sound. Then, as one, they began to retreat, melting back into the shadows with inhuman speed. The lead creature, the one that had spoken to me, paused at the edge of the darkness. "This isn't over," it growled. "We'll be waiting. Always waiting." Then it was gone, leaving me alone in the suddenly quiet barn. Moments later, the door burst open. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom, accompanied by shouts of, "Police! Is anyone in here?" I sank to my knees, the pitchfork clattering to the ground beside me. As the officers rushed towards me, asking if I was all right, what had happened, all I could do was laugh. A hysterical, broken sound that echoed through the now empty barn. How could I explain what had happened here? Who would believe me? As they led me out into the rain, which now seemed positively welcoming compared to what I'd faced inside, I knew my life had changed forever. The world was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And somewhere out there in the shadows between streetlights and the forgotten places of the city, the creatures were waiting, watching, hungry. I climbed into the back of the police car, my mind reeling. One thing was certain. I was done with late-night deliveries. From now on, I'd stick to the daylight hours, to the busy streets and crowded places, because now I knew what lurked in the dark, and I never wanted to face it again. Story 15. The first time I saw it, I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the towering pines, nothing more. But as the miles rolled by and night settled in, that flicker of movement kept pace, always just at the edge of my headlight's reach. It was only when I finally pulled over, the silence of the forest pressing in around me, that I realized the true horror of my situation. Whatever had been following me wasn't content to stay in the trees anymore. And as I heard those heavy footsteps approaching from behind, I knew my quiet drive through the national forest had just become a fight for survival. My name's Sarah, and until that night I was just another overworked city dweller seeking a bit of solitude in nature. The long weekend stretched before me, promising a chance to clear my head and reset. I'd chosen this particular route through the national forest for its reputation as a scenic drive, far from the crowds that usually plagued more popular camping spots. The first few hours had been exactly what I needed. The stress of the work week melted away as I wound through miles of pristine wilderness, not another car in sight. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and pink, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. That's when I first noticed it. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone almost before I registered it. I brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue or an overactive imagination. But as twilight deepened into true night, that nagging sense of being watched grew stronger. I flicked on my high beams, cutting a swath of light through the encroaching darkness. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and there, just beyond the illuminated stretch of road, I saw it again, something large moving parallel to my car. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Get a grip, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "It's probably just a deer." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. The movement was too fluid, too purposeful to be any animal I was familiar with, and it was keeping pace with my car, even as I unconsciously pressed harder on the accelerator. For the next 20 minutes, I drove in a state of increasing panic. Every few seconds, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the trees, a flash of pale skin, the gleam of eyes reflecting my headlights. Once I could have sworn I saw a hand far too large to be human reach out from behind a tree trunk. My GPS had long since lost signal, the screen mockingly displaying nothing but an endless expanse of green. I had no idea how far I was from the next town, or even if I was still on the right road. All I knew was that I needed to keep driving, to outrun whatever was stalking me through this endless forest. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As I rounded a sharp bend, my headlights illuminated a fallen tree blocking the entire road. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on the asphalt, coming to a stop mere feet from the massive trunk. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, trying to calm my racing heart. I was trapped. There was no way around the tree, and I didn't fancy my chances trying to turn around on the narrow road, especially not with whatever that thing was still out there. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the forest behind my car. With shaking hands, I turned off the engine. The silence that fell was oppressive, broken only by those steadily approaching footsteps and the pounding of my own heart. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever it was to reach me. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone, still frustratingly without signal, and the small canister of pepper spray I kept in my glove compartment. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible, I opened the car door and stepped out. The night air was cool on my skin, carrying the scent of pine and something else. A musky animal odor that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned, facing the direction the footsteps were coming from. "Hello?" I called out, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. "Is someone there? I could use some help with this tree." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a sound that I'll never forget as long as I live, a low, rumbling growl that was decidedly not human. My fight-or-flight response kicked in, and I chose flight. I sprinted away from the road into the forest on the opposite side. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness. Behind me, I heard a roar that shook the very air around me, followed by the sound of something massive crashing through the underbrush. It was pursuing me, and it was fast. I ran blindly, no idea where I was going, driven purely by terror. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear it getting closer, its growls and snarls spurring me on. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I burst into a small clearing. In the center stood an old fire tower, its metal frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Without hesitation, I made for the ladder, scrambling up as fast as my trembling limbs would allow. I had just pulled myself onto the platform at the top when the creature entered the clearing. In the pale moonlight, I got my first clear look at what had been stalking me. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, with a body covered in shaggy fur. Its arms were long, ending in hands tipped with wicked claws. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a twisted amalgamation of bear and human features with eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. It looked up at me, lips pulling back in a snarl that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. Then, to my horror, it began to climb. The tower shook as the creature made its way up, the metal groaning under its weight. I pressed myself against the far railing, pepper spray clutched in my shaking hand. It was a pitiful defense against this monster, but it was all I had. As its massive form crested the edge of the platform, I did the only thing I could think of. I sprayed it directly in the eyes. The creature reared back with a roar of pain and fury, nearly losing its grip on the tower. For a moment, I dared to hope that it would fall, but it held on, shaking its head and blinking rapidly. When it looked at me again, its eyes were no longer filled with primal hunger, but with something almost like curiosity. "You fight," it growled, its voice a deep rumble that I felt in my bones. "Others run. You fight." I stood there, frozen in shock. It could speak? What was this thing? What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature cocked its head to the side, an unsettlingly human gesture. "We are the old ones, the forgotten, the ones your kind pushed into the dark places." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't exist in the real world, and yet here I was, having a conversation with a creature that should have been impossible. "Why were you chasing me?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Hungry," it growled. "Always hungry, but you are different, brave, maybe useful." I didn't like the sound of that. "Useful how?" The creature's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile if not for all those teeth. "We have been alone for so long, forgotten by your world. But things are changing. The old barriers are weakening. We need an ambassador." I blinked, sure I had misheard. An ambassador, me, but I'm nobody. I'm just Sarah. Sarah, it repeated as if tasting the name. Sarah who fights. Sarah who does not run. Yes, you will do nicely. Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Helicopter blades. A searchlight swept across the clearing, illuminating the tower and the creature in harsh white light. The beast snarled, shielding its eyes. They come. But this is not over, Sarah who fights. We will find you again. Remember. With that, it released its grip on the tower, dropping to the ground with surprising grace for something so large. In seconds, it had disappeared back into the forest, leaving me alone on the swaying platform. The helicopter descended, and I saw park rangers rappelling down, weapons drawn. As they reached me, asking if I was all right, what had happened, I found I had no words to explain. How could I tell them about the creature that defied explanation? About the conversation that had turned my understanding of the world upside down? As they led me to the helicopter, I looked back at the dark expanse of the forest. Somewhere out there, the creature and others like it were waiting. And they had chosen me for something. I climbed into the helicopter, my mind whirling. One thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. The world was bigger, stranger, and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And somewhere out there in the depths of the forest, something was waiting for me. Something that saw me not as prey, but as a potential ally in a world that had forgotten it existed. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying me back to the safety of civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. One that I, for better or worse, was now a part of. The national forest fell away beneath us, once again just a sea of tranquil green. But I knew the truth now. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be long before the creatures of the dark places came calling again.